Welcome back to Power Talk with me, Mbuyiseni Ndlozi. We are going to look in this segment of the show at this interesting story that in the U.S. Congress, United States of American Congress, two congressmen, Congressman Ronny Jackson and John James, co-authored, co-sponsored a bill that is trying to basically review bilateral relations between the South African government and the United States. And we want to talk about what that bill does, what it's seeking to achieve. But we prepared this clip by John James, who spoke at the beginning of the process, and this is what he had to say. Take a listen.
The Committee on Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Africa will come to order. The purpose of this hearing is to examine the current status of the United States-South Africa bilateral relationship. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. I am quite proud of the United States and South Africa's cordial relations for nearly my entire life. South Africa has been the United States' largest trading partner in Africa since 2014. It's home to hundreds of American businesses, and the value of our two-way trade has reached $21 billion in 2021. However, it's becoming clear that the African National Congress of today is no longer the party of Nelson Mandela. While the South African story is one of hope, reconciliation, and determination, the ANC today is motivated by perpetuating a system of elite capture built on corruption and increasing government dependence through its national democratic revolution. And while clearly deepening relations with the Chinese Communist Party and Putin's Russia. As a black man, I carry the knowledge of my own country's historical burden of inequality. And as a conservative black man, I understand that hard work, perseverance, and getting a shot pays off. That is clearly not the case in South Africa's ruling party, where nearly 30 years into ANC rule, the South African people are more dependent than ever on a state that fails to consistently provide even the most basic services and provides bad policy. Take the example of black economic empowerment, a policy intended to support historically disadvantaged black citizens by providing increased access to the economy, but one that has repeatedly been undermined by corruption and nepotism from the ANC elites who have manipulated the scheme for personal gain at the expense of the broader black populace. The ANC elite are focused on increasing dependence on the state in order to exert control. Recently, it was publicly stated that there are now 18 million South Africans receiving state grants compared to just 2.5 million in 1999. Much of this going to provide basic needs at the failure of states to generate meaningful and sustained employment that can only come with a healthy, growing private sector. Another disastrous policy is the ANC's land reform effort to enforce expropriation without compensation and destroy South Africa's constitutionally protected private property rights. The ANC claims that land reform and EWC are widely popular, but their own surveys show that only 2% of black South Africans identify land reform as a serious unresolved problem, while 80% prioritize economic growth and more jobs over land expropriation. Despite this, the ANC is currently pushing the expropriation bill and land court bill through Parliament to reward themselves for a job poorly done. There is no country in the world that has remained democratic after removing its population's private property rights, and I remain concerned about the ANC's democratic drift away from constitutional rule, especially in light of the Electoral Amendment Act being signed into law in April. This legislation undermines the fundamental democratic principle of proportional representation. Counting independent votes as votes for the majority, the ANC, is not a step toward constitutional rule. It's a further step away from democracy. In February, I introduced a House Resolution 145, which criticized specific aspects of the ANC's growing relationship with the Chinese Communist Party and Russia. Specifically, it highlighted South Africa's hosting of military exercises with Russia and China on the anniversary of Russia's further invasion of Ukraine, and the fact that South Africa has abstained on multiple United Nations votes condemning Russia's invasion, an invasion that an official ANC policy blames on the United States and attributes to NATO's eastward expansion. This, while the ANC accepted roughly $826,000 from a firm directly linked to the sanctioned Russian billionaire Viktor Vekselberg. More recently, the ANC hosted the BRICS conference in Johannesburg and has actively involved itself in Moscow, Beijing's effort to de-dollarize the global monetary system and rewrite international norms. Simply put, I believe these actions are inconsistent with South Africa's proud tradition of non-alignment, and it should not go unaddressed in our relationship. In conclusion, in her meeting with Secretary Blinken yesterday, Foreign Minister Pandor described the United States as one of the most important partners for South Africa. The United States has provided over $8 billion in bilateral aid to South Africa in the past 20 years, much of this through PEPFAR, an incredible bipartisan effort that has roughly halved South Africa's national HIV and AIDS mortality rate. The United States is South Africa's second largest trading partner, and 21% of South Africa's exports to the U.S. enjoy non-reciprocal duty-free trade status. I've said before, and I will say again, South Africa has a choice in what partners to prioritize, but so too does the United States. I believe it entirely appropriate to scrutinize the conduct of our important partner when the risks compromising our strong, dynamic, bilateral relationship are at hand. In closing, it's my belief that South Africa is currently at an inflection point, and I view the next several months as critical in demonstrating whether it will put our important partnership back on track.
That's the voice of Congressman John James. We're now joined by a political strategist down in the United States, and you will correct me, but I think in Washington, D.C., Joseph Szlavik-Soto. Welcome to Power Talk, and thanks very much for creating time to speak to us.
Good morning, Mbuyiseni. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. And am I correct that you're in D.C.?
I am. I am in our nation's capital, Washington, D.C.
Yeah, and is it early hours of the morning? I'm sure we've disrupted your sleep.
That's okay. The sun's not up yet. Usually I get up about 5:30, but what is it? It's about 4:15 here. So, you know, the early bird gets the worm, as they say.
I appreciate it. I'll give you all the worms in this show.
Fantastic. I'm ready to eat.
Point of departure.
Are they Mopani worms?
Yeah, Mopani worms indeed.
There's some Mopani worms. Yeah.
Thank you. Who are these? Maybe as a point of departure, just an explanation. Who is John James, as well as Mr. Jackson? Just a background of who are they?
Yeah, I mean, look, they're both distinguished, kind of newly elected members of Congress. John James is from Michigan. He went to West Point, which is the Army's military academy. Served in, I believe, Iraq or Afghanistan. He was a helicopter pilot, and he was also the chairman of the subcommittee on Africa on the House Foreign Relations Committee. Left the Army, and he had a run for the Senate. Young and dynamic, I would say, let's say a conservative Republican. And then you've got Congressman Ronny Jackson, who's from Texas, also a newly elected member of Congress. He was the chief medical officer to Barack Obama and to Donald Trump when he was in the Navy. I think, don't quote me, I think he got out as an admiral, but newly elected as well. And he's on the House, I think, Foreign Affairs and also on the House Intelligence Committee. So both newly kind of elected, dynamic, well-respected members of Congress from the Republican Party.
And what then, in summary, what does the bill that they are sponsoring seek to do?
Well, look, I think they're looking at various options and trying to realign the U.S.-South Africa relationship. And I think a lot of this has to do with some of the tweets that came about from former Ambassador Rasool. I think there's been kind of concerns about, alignment with Russia and China and Iran. So I think there's been kind of a should we say, loss of good faith and confidence between the two countries. So I think it's an effort to try to realign and trying to reawaken and figure out, does the United States want to prioritize this relationship with South Africa or not?
And how do they seek to achieve this concretely? I mean, what mechanisms or instruments are they trying to use to reshape this relationship, bilateral relationship?
Well, look, some of it clearly is trade these days with President Trump's tariffs. which could be part of it. Secondly, there's an array of tools. There's upgrading and downgrading of our foreign assistance and development programs with USAID and trade investment. As you know, we have AGOA, which is the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, and also that if they wanted to, I think, which would be probably extreme, they could there could be certain individuals that could be sanctioned on banking and other ways. So I think there's a hearing. I don't think this is the end of it. I think they're going to explore various options, but I think the U.S. South Africa relationship is very, very important to the United States, particularly in Africa, and I think they're concerned that the things are highly imbalanced, and I think it's kind of a way of trying to ring the fire bells and say, hey, listen, this is getting serious now, and we're looking at taking some punitive measures. I think with the hopes of recalibrating where the United States and South Africa are.
If you've just joined us, this is Power Talk with me, Mbuyiseni Ndlozi. We are having a conversation about the United States congressmen who have sponsored a bill in Congress to try and reshape the South Africa-United States bilateral relationship. And we are speaking to a political strategist down in Washington, D.C., Mr. Joseph Szlavik-Soto. Now, Joseph, I'm trying to make sense of this. Firstly, let's take the first aspect that they identify, which is South Africa's relationship with Russia. It seems to me that there's totally nothing new for the last 30 years that South Africa is doing with Russia. And in relation to the Ukraine, South Africa was neutral. So are many African countries and some of the international European as well as East Asian countries. But also President Trump's attitude in relation to that war is totally different. How do we explain the highlighting of Russia and Putin as a hostile U.S. partner? Because from Trump's perspective, this is not true anymore.
Well, look, to be frank, I think with regard to the Russia-Ukraine issue and the U.S., the first real issue that happened was not under President Trump, and it was under the administration of Joe Biden. Remember, if you can recall, we had Ambassador Ruben Brigady. He was our ambassador in South Africa, and as you may recall, he had gone on kind of in public and accused South Africa of providing weapons to Russia secretly. And I think, don't quote me on this, I have to go back to my notes here somewhere, but something to the effect that, he would bet all the tea in China, so to speak, with regard to this being true. So this is where I think the first rift started. These allegations that South Africa was secretly providing weapons to Russia, and this obviously President Biden was very, very, very supportive of the Ukrainians and President Zelensky, and this was I think the first real rift with regard to that. So this was the first issue, and I think obviously President Trump feels the same way. I think in essence between the U.S. and Russia, but I think President Trump really wants to bring the two countries to the peace table to get this put behind him. Look, the U.S. taxpayer has been paying a significant amount of the war effort. So with regard to South Africa, I think the concern has been that the Russia, China, and Iran have been increasing their bilateral relationships with South Africa, and with regard to the U.S., it's been going the opposite direction. And I think, like I said, not to knock Ambassador Rasul down, but they were quite. I think, don't quote me, there were over 200 or 300 pretty nasty tweets that were made about President Trump. So I guess that didn't help either. So and there's various folks here in the U.S. media who have South African backgrounds who kind of highlighted these tweets which were all deleted. So they obviously couldn't have been good if they were deleted. So I think there's just a feeling, both since the days of probably President Biden and now with President Trump, that South Africa has drifted further away from the United States, and that really there's an issue of trust between the two countries.
On the floor, I assume these are Republican congressmen. What is the likelihood of the bill actually passing?
Well, That's a good question. Look, the Congress has 2 years, right? Our Congress runs on a 2-year cycle, so it has 2 years to make its way through the House, and then the United States Senate has to also pass a bill, which then has to be reconciled, and then these laws or policies will be passed. As you know, the United States, we've designated, President Trump has designated somebody to be our ambassador, and I believe South Africa has not designated who their ambassador is going to be. But the way I see it, look, you got two big businessmen. You've got President Ramaphosa, and you've got President Trump, who I'm positive if the two of them were put in a room together, they would get along very well. And it seems like, unfortunately, that the smaller animals, should we say, in the political scene have really affected the relationship between the two big elephants, should we say. So I see South Africa has appointed somebody, I think, to be a special envoy. I think it's the deputy minister. I think it's named Minister Jonas.
Yes.
So, look, obviously the South Africans are concerned that the relationship is obviously straying. And so, look, and obviously there's some controversy about things he said as well. But I do think that there's an opportunity for President Ramaphosa to engage with President Trump, and they both can then, respectable representatives. If you look in the first Trump administration, he sent a personal friend of his, Lana Marks, to be our ambassador to South Africa. And she is a personal friend of President Trump. And as you know, President Trump is a people person. If he likes you and feels that you're sincere, even if you make mistakes, he will work with you. So anytime you have a person that's designated to be an ambassador who's not from the Foreign Service, but a real political appointee, a friend of President Trump's, that's an excellent opportunity. And I think President Trump has nominated Mr. Bozell, who's very well connected here in Washington. He was running our version of U.S. Global Media Agency, which is Voice of America in essence. And he's very well connected. So I think there's an opportunity. But yeah, going back to your question, I think, look, the bill's serious. I think if it's if there isn't, let's say, efforts by both countries, I think we'd probably find an appetite in Congress to advance it. So, let's hope it doesn't get to that. But I think there's, I would say there's a better than 50-50 chance of the legislation advancing.
Final question is, does South Africa still have friends in the Republican Party as well as the Democratic Party? Are there congressmen and women who openly are on the side of South Africa in these deteriorating relations?
Great question. Look, I always call them champions, right? I tell a lot of my clients, who are your champions? And sometimes they sit there scratching their head, which is not a good sign. So the question is, who are the champions? Look, I definitely think that Congressman John James and even Congressman Ronny Jackson, who was just in Africa, I think Ronny Jackson was in Congo, Rwanda, and Uganda recently, dealing with that whole M23 crisis in Congo. So they're both very familiar with Africa. I actually think they both could be the biggest champions for South Africa. I think that, however, they have concerns that there's been just a lot of bad policy going on. There are some members of Congress who are definitely pro-South Africa. At one point, there used to be a U.S. South Africa Congressional Caucus, which is a formal group within our Congress. These are members of Congress that joined the caucus to really advocate for South Africa. And I think that caucus kind of imploded around when President Obama got elected. I have to go back and take a look. It was either on Bush or, and that caucus that had been formed was really a powerhouse. It really did a lot of great things. And since the caucus has been gone or was not renewed, it's been kind of rudderless. So I do think, like I said, between President Ramaphosa and Trump, I think if people were involved at that level, I think you would see some rather quick, I think adjustments with the relationship. I think as long as you've got kind of lower level folks carrying the water, I think there's some risk. Like I said, I'm sure President Ramaphosa wants to have his legacy, and I'm sure he'd like to put his fingerprints on it. And as you can see, I think President Trump is pretty active every day, putting his fingerprint on what his legacy should be. So I think, look, the U.S.-South Africa relationship is really important. There's no two ways about it. But I think the feeling in Washington is that the relationship has not been I think the U.S. it's called the U.S.-South Africa bilateral relations. Every so many years, our two governments meet at a very, very high level. I think the only other country in Africa that we have that relationship with is Angola and Kenya. And I think there's concerns that, South Africa is not as aligned or as engaged with the U.S. So hopefully maybe this legislation will wake everybody up and, people will say, hey, look, we really value each other. And there's, like I said, there's probably a reset that's required. And I think it's, if President Ramaphosa gets personally involved, I think President Trump would be more than magnanimous to engage with him. And, President Trump, we have a very famous politician here, or TV guy named Bill Maher, who's rather anti-Republican. He's voted for Obama and Clinton. And he had dinner with President Trump last week. And you can check him out on YouTube. And he talks about, the President Trump you see in public is not the one you meet in public. So I think, like I said, if you got Ramaphosa and Trump somehow together in the room, I think a lot of this distraction could be put behind, and more important stuff of getting the two economies and the two countries to work together. Look, China just imposed sanctions on critical earths and critical minerals, strategic minerals. This is South Africa's strength. There's so many minerals in South Africa that I think, in terms of the mining, South Africa could more than, should we say, get the attention of the U.S. with all the strategic and critical minerals that it has. So there is an opportunity to fix what's going on.
No, thanks very much indeed for your time and for joining us. And I wish you a good day there in D.C.
Thanks, Mbuyiseni.
Thank you. That's Mr. Joseph Szlavik-Soto from Washington, D.C., a political strategist based in Washington, D.C. It's time for the headlines here on Power Talk. It's 10:30. We're going to take the headlines with Nyakallo Tefu.